It's formational. It's a tool that extends us, in various ways, and forms us in various ways. And I think the big practical question is how and what it does, and should we have some control in what we're being shaped into.
Hello and welcome to Faith at the Frontiers, a podcast that confronts challenges to the Christian faith with hope. In this episode, we talk to Mari van Emerick and Oliver Wright, two scholars at Pembroke College Oxford who are working in the area of theology, philosophy, and artificial intelligence. They emphasize the role of the humanities in responding to and engaging with big questions raised by LLMs, particularly questions that have to do with what it means to be human. What do these technologies reveal to us about ourselves? And how are they shaping us? Angels end up being a consistent theme of this conversation, for which I take full responsibility. We hope you enjoy.
Well, it's a very great pleasure to welcome two academics from Pembroke College, where Austin and I both were earlier, and to discuss large language models, which most people think of as ChatGPT, but there's a lot more of them than just ChatGPT. So we're just going to call them LLMs for short. Thank you for joining us, Oliver Wright. Hi.
Hello.
And Mari van Emerick. Yeah. I'm very excited about this conversation. I'm looking forward to chatting through it. So most people, when they use the word AI these days, they all of a sudden seem to mean just large language models, whereas the word AI has been around for decades before that and meant all kinds of other things that were not quite as specific. So the first question that we have for you is basically, what is it about these LLMs that appeared like only about 2.5 years ago? What is about them that's new, that's sort of taken over the term AI?
But perhaps we should start, Marie and I, by saying thank you very much for having us on the show, Austin and Barney. It's a real privilege to be with you from Pembroke, which I know you both loved being at, and part of the reason for us both being on it is that our research projects while we're at Pembroke are both coming at artificial intelligence, but from slightly different perspectives. My perspective is having worked on theology and the philosophy of language. So I am coming at LLMs with a particular interest. And Marie, what's your interest?
I'm interested in embodiment, so I'm kind of approaching AI, LLMs, artificial intelligence from a bicultural stance. So I'm thinking about the implications for understanding how intelligence is fundamentally shaped by cultural, material, and social contexts. And so kind of that gets me thinking about both human cognition and artificial intelligence, and what really the difference is between those two, and how theology comes into it, particularly Christian doctrine of incarnation.
That's fantastic. Really, really important and valuable angles to bring to this whole question. I mean, everybody's talking about AI these days at the moment. So this is the right place to try and shed some light on this topic.
But with the question you asked, Barney, I think really striking thing about LLMs, ChatGPT, similar models, is they have crossed the threshold of naturalness that I think has caught everyone off guard. Because we had chatbots for decades, they always felt a bit clunky and robotic, and these new LLMs that we're talking about today, they can write you a sonnet, they can explain physics, they can debug your code or crack jokes, all of that in a conversational flow that feels human. There's this really interesting paper, a recent paper from Alan Turing Institute, that talks about the qualitative turn. And what they mean by that is that AI has shifted very recently from producing numbers and all these kind of outcomes, the way it used to work from the 1950s, essentially, to generating cultural content, right? And now, again, we talk about language, we talk about images, we talk about all sorts of cultural output. And the problem is these systems, even though they now operate in these deeply cultural spaces, they actually lack frameworks for understanding cultural meaning. And this is exactly where my work comes in. And this is exactly, I think, why it is so important for humanities and humanities expertise to come into this conversation, because there's a really, really big shift happening in AI right now.
Yeah, we'll need you to unpack a lot of that. That's a very dense set of ideas right there. You used the term at the beginning, they've crossed the threshold of naturalness. Is that what you said?
Yeah. That's essentially what I was talking about, the idea of kind of conversing with these LLMs. It feels very natural. It feels like you are talking to a human, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of going all the way back to, Alan Turing and his question, right, about AI. And we are there, right? It feels natural, but what it does to us, and I think, I'm quite excited talking about it with you guys today. Not just what AI will do to this world, but what it does to us, what it does to our cognition, our humanity, all of these things that the fancy term of theological anthropology covers. That I think is a really, really interesting question to explore.
Indeed, yeah. Ollie, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, I mean, just where Marie was finishing off there, I think at root for us theologians is an opportunity to contribute thousands of years of thinking and talking about what it is to be human into a conversation where I think it seems to both of us that contribution is severely lacking. And indeed, most of the philosophical systems which are underpinning responses to artificial intelligence in the last 10 years have sort of been questioning the whole basis upon which they've been proceeding, and there seems to be almost a universal plea for somebody to come up with something that would make it clear what it is to be human, and us theologians are sort of in the background going, we're over here. So I think
That's a good point.
in Oxford actually. A lot of theologians have been waking up to this as an opportunity and something that theology can contribute for the benefit of culture and wider society. And I think both Marie and my heart for this is really to do with the flourishing of humans. And neither of us are computer scientists like you, Barney. So whilst
I was a computer scientist, I wouldn't call myself one anymore. I don't think I would survive if I was thrown into the software engineering world anymore.
Yeah. So whilst I think as theologians we need to understand enough about the processes, and so hence listening to and spending time with engineers to try and understand how each LLM is working, and how they often talk about turning dials on their system, and so changing bias or changing the way they respond to certain questions that are asked. So we do need to do that work, but we do that work so as to be able to understand what sort of machine and tool this is, so as to clarify for ourselves what we are made in God's image to be.
So I find that a really helpful perspective, because what you're saying is this is actually, we shouldn't see these LLMs as a sort of threat to our humanity, which a lot of people seem to be like a bit afraid that this is going to undermine some of what it means to be human. You're saying it's actually an opportunity for us to figure out what it means to be human in the face of an alternative that can mimic some elements of what it means to be human better than anything else has been able to do before. Am I understanding you right?
Yeah. And Barney, you've been working on this concept we have in theology of the Imago Dei, which refers in a very shorthand way to the first chapter of Genesis, and the idea that humans, both male and female, are made in the image of God. And I think one of the interesting things about this, and somebody that we know and love called Alistair McGrath has made a similar point, is the way certain doctrines over the history of theology have evolved or developed according to scientific discoveries which were current at the time. So it's not that the science has driven the theology, but that theologians have been scratching their head and thinking, well, is the answer that we gave in the previous generation good enough? And perhaps we can use this as a springboard to develop our understanding and to deepen it in the light of what we now know humans are capable of doing. So just taking the doctrine of Imago Dei, that has gone through many permutations through the last 2,000 years and before. And we, even before AI, we would say perhaps that some of the medieval settlements about what the Imago Dei meant are insufficient. That's not to say that they're wrong, but they might need deepening and
they don't say
reflecting.
Everything that needs to be said.
Correct. So in a way, we are just inhabiting the same space which theology has always inhabited, which is to look at the world clear-sightedly and to try and look at God as clearly as we can through the indistinctness, and to reflect more deeply about what we say about God and what we say about the world and humans, which he made in response to what humans are now capable of doing.
Yeah, I wonder, this makes me think of when I teach my students the Church Fathers, and they talk about the Imago Dei, and they connect that strongly with nous, right? The Greek word that we often translate as intellect. And one of the really striking things is that it's almost impossible for modern students to understand what that word meant to the Church Fathers, right? And so we realize we have all of this kind of cultural baggage around what intelligence is, what intellect is.
Yeah, because the Church Fathers tended to say that what it means to be created in God's image is that we have, well, it's often translated rationality, isn't it? Reason, the intelligence, perhaps. And you're saying that this word nous doesn't necessarily capture, when we say intelligence in the modern era, we tend to think of sort of analytic mathematical ability, like a high IQ, a really, really smart person. That must be more in the image of God than a really stupid person. But Austin, you're saying that's not what the fathers meant, right?
Yeah, not remotely, right? And so I think that this is what you're saying. I think it really connects with this, because artificial intelligence has again raised this question of what do we mean by intelligence? Why are we calling it this? How do we think about ourselves as humans? And often how we think about ourselves as humans is reflected back to us through the things that we make and engage with. And so I find it quite a kind of fruitful moment in that way to say, like, let's think again about what even we are as humans, right? And why our cultural location sometimes makes it impossible to even understand how even Christians have thought about that in the past.
So what are some of the challenges then to our understanding of what it means to be human that these LLMs are giving us? Like, for one thing, I guess this might be an easy question to answer, but a lot of people really seem to be treating the ChatGPT or Gemini or some of these things like a human being. They're asking them for advice or counseling, or they're turning to them. I know somebody who wanted to deepen his Christian faith, so he just went to ChatGPT and said, what Christian book should I read next? And I was like, really? What, you're going to trust it to give you good guidance on that? So to what extent are LLMs rightly understood as having personality? Perhaps that's the question that we're going for.
Sorry.
No.
I think I warned you that I might eventually feel like I have some rants.
Go for it.
On this.
Take it away.
You know what? I think we have to be really careful here, because our intuitions about personality and consciousness and sentience, all these things, that they could really mislead us very badly here. Do LLMs have personality? I mean, in a very limited sense, maybe we can say yes. But I mean, that's more like a personality of a character in a book or a novel, right? Like that kind of personality that is more about consistent patterns of response, like if we can call that
a constructed personality, actually. Like,
yeah.
The software engineer we had in the previous episode talked about the weights, which was a technical term I didn't know about, which was like you're defining, the software engineer actually defines how polite versus how rude
exactly
the thing is going to be. And in that sense, there's a personality that is imposed on it.
Yeah, exactly. There are certain stylistic preferences, tendencies, and in that sense, maybe we can talk about personality, but that's, again, as you just said, it's a constructed term here. But when it comes to consciousness, sentience, potential for that, I'm quite confident that the answer is no here. And I think it really matters enormously for how we treat LLMs, AI, all of that potential for generative AI. It's really important. It has very, very deep ethical implications, as you have suggested earlier. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about consciousness. We can talk about that idea that, when I bite into an apple, right, I'm not just processing the information about the sweetness or crispness or whatever color of that apple. I'm experiencing all of those things. And current LLMs are, yes, they're doing incredibly sophisticated pattern matching, text generation, but there's absolutely no evidence that they have any in their experience whatsoever. So I don't know. I kind of feel like when LLM tells us that it is happy to help us, it's not actually happy. It's not feeling happiness. It's just producing tokens that statistically tend to appear in helpful responses. And if you push back, which I have done, like, are you actually happy? It will tell you that it's not, and that this is, just so.
But I guess even that it's programmed to do, right? It's programmed to say I'm happy to help, and it's programmed to say actually I'm not technically happy if you actually challenge it on that.
But it's just, I feel like it's so easy to slide into a sci-fi zone in these type of conversations, and I think it is very, very important to tread lightly and to try to kind of not overstate certain things.
I agree 100% with Marie. And I think part of the challenge where we are today is that this tool has so easily convinced people of a personhood, or you use the word personality, that it feels like we're kind of pushing against the tide in terms of telling, prescribing for people that actually this isn't a personality, because
it makes you sound like a grumpy curmudgeon who's behind the times, right?
the response comes back, well, I put my Bible study in there and it told me that it was a great Bible study, so blah blah blah. And I have two reflections. One of them would be like a Marie reflection, and one of them would be a more of a me reflection, about just to take this conversation to a slightly deeper level, and that is that to think about personality, you could talk about a function of a person's language and a person's body presence. And in terms of language, what I understand to be doing is that the programs are designed to take a word and its supposed clear meaning, and it creates a token for it in the machine, and that then is just a number which is used on the probability basis, which statistics, which Marie was referring to, and so it comes back at you as if all words were doing was to word means X, and it's just a sequence of word means X. Now this is sort of profoundly limiting to what human language actually achieves all the time. And my particular interest is in the way language acts, what were originally called performative utterances by J.L. Austin here in Oxford in the 1950s. Well,
speech acts, isn't it? Speech acts as well.
It became speech acts when it moved, yeah. And
okay.
And the point is that all human language is acting all the time in ways that it is kind of unintentional, and our words are always being received in unintended ways, and meanings are always being crossed, because there's no such thing as an absolutely one-to-one ratio between a word and its meaning. There's this kind of, our words and our language operate in a web of meanings as they interrelate and as we speak to one another. So even as we interrelate one another, our meanings are shifting as we understand different forms of words. And
well, can we give a couple of examples to make this concrete? Something that I might say, like, can we think of a good example here?
Well, the classic thing that the philosophers in the 50s were doing, where they were talking about colours, and they would there are very complicated and abstruse discussions about whether or not you can say something as red or black, and then on the other hand there are there was a whole brand of philosophy at the time which was trying to say that language was only useful to the extent that it had a clear reference, to the extent that it had a clear meaning, and any other form of language was literally meaningless. So at a stroke, that brand of philosophy was saying things like prayer, or things like appointment language, I appoint you so-and-so, it's not capable of a reference, so it's meaningless. And I think what Austin's discovery was, it was not because he was a particularly wonderful or regular prayer, far from it. But what he was saying was, look, there is this whole realm of language out there which is human, and it's doing things all the time, and it's wrong to try and sort of delimit it to this to this simple kind of frame of reference. So that's on the language side. And as to your question, Barney, about personality, but also there's a whole question of embodiment. It's something I'm very keen on, increasingly keen on, and I love listening to Marie talking about, because to me, being a Christian means understanding that Jesus Christ died and on the third day rose again in the body. And so for me, my faith specifies that bodily resurrection is a fundamental part of what has happened in the past and what will happen in the future. So disembodiment for me is not an option that I want to go for, but also embodiment is part of a God-given gift that makes us human, and is part of our future hope for what it will be to be human in the new creation. And therefore embodiment is non-negotiable, and is fundamental.
You mean as part of what it means to be a person, you have to have a body, or even be a body in some language?
To be a person, to be conscious, to have intelligence even, I would say, because I think the problem is most AI, and like whether we talk about LLMs, except I will qualify here, most AI except for some very new experimental forms that are out there, and people are kind of talking about embodied forms of AI, robotics.
Well, yeah, I think the ordinary person on the street would say, well, there is embodied AI. If you look in Japan, they're making these robots. They have a robot that's designed to look as much like a human being as they can right now. So is embodiment really what distinguishes human beings from AI?
Also, I have a technical theological question here. Historically, Christians have defined a person as an individual substance of a rational nature, which for them included angels as persons who are not embodied, and also the divine persons, Father, Son, and Spirit, who also do not have bodies. And so we would typically say that human persons, embodiment is essential to human personhood. But what I think is interesting is that actually, so typically we would say, right, we have embodied persons or we have spiritual persons, and AI is neither of those, or it's essentially a physical thing, right? It's electronic pulses and that kind of thing. So it is physical, just not in the organic sense that we are.
Gosh, you've complicated things quite a lot, Austin.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard enough when we just talked about cognitive science.
But it perhaps does help to compare what we're saying with angels, because, we say what distinguishes us from angels. It's actually not personhood, it's embodiment. Is that the same thing as what distinguishes us from LLMs then? Most Christians would want to say no, but we need to dig into why.
Well, let's take it one at a time. When we talk about AI, whether that's including robotics or not, most of it is still based on the idea that thinking is essentially information processing, right? So this is kind of a realm of cognitive science rather than theology right now. It's pattern recognition, it's prediction. There are multiple different ways of framing it, but essentially it's about that. At the same time, there are decades of cognitive science research that shows that human intelligence is fundamentally embodied. Our thinking is shaped by having bodies, by moving through space, by physical interactions with this world, and by our cultural environment. And again, anyone who is multicultural, multilingual, I'm coming from that kind of background, can attest to that, how all of these things, they really profoundly shape your intelligence, your way of being, your way of thinking, your personality. There are all these things we can throw in less technical terms right now. But where theology comes in, what I'm really interested in is thinking about the Christian doctrine of incarnation. We'll pause the angelology for a minute, and then with that, I think it does make a strikingly similar claim, because God and God's universal intelligence didn't remain abstract or disembodied, and this is, Ollie is supporting that claim here. God became flesh, right? Lived in a very particular place, spoke a very particular language, experienced a very particular culture, right? And in that sense, I think the incarnation is this profound, resounding yes to embodiment, and the importance of that in what it is to be a person, right? And the incarnate part of God, right? That is part of the Trinity, and kind of we can think about singularity of time and how it all works out theologically, but that is not optional, right? And the body is not optional to the human being either. The body is not optional to the human intelligence from cognitive science perspective. So when it comes to thinking about artificial intelligence, part of me is wondering whether it's intelligent at all. So in
that's
that
an important
sense,
question. Yeah. We have to define what we mean by intelligence as well.
Can I just add one more thing that this is making me think of?
Only if it's not a further complication.
It's not about angels.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on angels.
I have thoughts about angels. But the other thing, I just think this is so interesting because I love what you're saying, and it's making me think about how, for again, a lot of you think patristic medieval, again, there's a lot of different traditions or historical periods we could draw on theologically, but for a lot of them, they would make the distinction between cognitive processing, which is done by our brains, and intelligence as something that is not embodied, but is a power of our souls. That's
right. Intellect and reason were the two terms, weren't they?
Yeah. And so
reason is what your brain actually does as a sort of step-by-step process, whereas intellect is you don't need the brain for intellect, because it just intuitively grasps ideas. So angels have intellect, but they don't have reason, because they don't need reason.
That's right.
I'm making notes.
That's right. So I think it's fascinating because in part of it, this just made me think of, and I hadn't thought of this before until you were talking. But the idea, you could almost say from that perspective, LLMs are mimicking a kind of rationality, which is something that's done by physical things, but not intellect. If we made a distinction there, right? So they're doing a kind of information processing. And the problem is that we tend to think that that's all humans do if we deny that they have a soul. But historically, Christians have said they're actually doing something beyond that.
Yeah. And this is a very, very important distinction. And I think, I do think, as I mentioned earlier, it is the job of humanities, it is the job of fields like theology to clarify these distinctions, because the implications of that are profound. And I really would love to pick up actually on the question you asked earlier, should we actually treat LLMs as human beings? And it's a complicated question. I'm part of these seminars where lots of people from different disciplines are at the moment thinking about the ethics of AI, LLMs in particular. And we just were, having quite a heated discussion on this topic, because opinions, you can imagine, vary quite profoundly. My intuition on this is that we shouldn't, and I'll tell you why. I think it is actually ethically crucial that we don't, because LLMs are tools. They're not moral agents. They don't, and I don't think they should have rights. They can't be harmed. They don't have interests. They don't have well-being. And I think when we anthropomorphize them too much, it actually becomes very dangerous, because this leads us to neglect the actual real humans who do have all these things.
I guess at a physical level, you would say that LLMs can't experience pain or pleasure, right? They can't actually like or dislike things.
Well, exactly, yes. But when we focus too much on the question of whether LLMs should have rights, we forget about the workers who are behind all of that, behind training data and being traumatized by that every day, all filtering all of the horrendous stuff that we don't get to experience using LLMs. And in the meantime,
well, maybe our audience doesn't know about that. Do you want to unpack that for a moment?
So a lot of the data that is being cleaned for us, whether that's talking about even going back to pre-LLMs, talking about just Facebook, social media, right? Things that pop up on your screen. the reason that we don't see, horrendous beheadings and, terrible things. I don't want to
scenes
trigger
of torture
people who are listening. Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Just awful things, is because there are actual people in very disadvantaged positions who are sitting there training, algorithms to not show them to us. In the meantime, they're getting. I've been, looking at some of the data on that. Sometimes, like,
so somebody has to see really, really terrible outputs from AI in order to tell AI, no, don't produce this kind of an output.
Exactly, and they don't get any psychological support. There are so many of these cases and all these just ethical implications of, then the questions of what should we do with LLMs and should we treat them as humans, because in the meantime, we forget about those people. We forget about the people whose jobs get displaced. We forget about communities who are actually harmed by all these biases encoded in the models, our human biases that, conveniently migrate into that. So that's one side of the thing. But I think what I, again, from the perspective of, my previous training is in cognitive science, I always care about what it does to us, what it does to our cognition, just the use of that, right? And I don't know if you come across, there's this really interesting conversation with Sam Altman recently, where someone asked him, the OpenAI CEO guy, right? He was asked about people saying please and thank you to ChatGPT. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I find it very hard not to say please and thank you when I'm asking.
Well, here's an interesting thing here, because they actually asked about it because there is a really, really big cost in terms of just first of all, money, millions of dollars that goes into all of that electricity that is needed, for processing power of every single word. So someone costed it was something like $10 million, tens of millions of dollars for just, all these interactions with. Exactly. But also think about all the environmental impact of that. That's compounded. And so despite that, Sam Altman actually said, tens of millions of dollars well spent. You never know. And I think, in some way,
you never know what? What do you never know?
I think what he meant was the robot uprising. So we're kind of like in that space again of sci-fi. But
so AI is going to take over the world, and then it will only be kind to the people who said please and thank you to it.
Yeah, just in case. But I think maybe it is worth saying please and thank you, but not so much because of, AI is going to come and punish all of us who didn't say thank you and were polite to it, but because of what it does to us. Not about what it is, because I don't think it cares. I don't think it will ever care. But I think what it does to us as humans, repeatedly being rude, to something that intuitively feels to us as human, would it mean that next time I, talk to my husband, I will not use that word again? Just, I think we train, and this is very much, Ollie and I are really on this topic all the time, kind of what the shaping, the making, what is it that AI is doing to us?
It gets you accustomed to a certain way of communicating.
It builds habits in us,
Exactly. Yeah. It's formational. It's a tool that extends us, in various ways and forms us in various ways. And I think the big practical question is how and what it does. And should we have some control in what we're being shaped into? It's certain liturgies. Again, I know there are lots of people that don't like the word liturgies thrown around in this kind of casual way, and I agree with the critique, but there's no better way of describing it. It's
ritual, sort of one step towards liturgy. Yeah. No, I think that was my intuition as well, is that I find it hard not to say please and thank you to the LLM, because even when I'm asking it something, I'm sort of treating it like a person, because it's behaving, at least in that limited fashion, like a person. And then if I stop saying please and thank you to it, then I may also stop saying please and thank you to actual human beings, just because, as you say, we get conditioned to behave a certain way when we're asking questions. So I think my intuition is the same as yours.
But also one of the questions that I think is, if we have something that feels human to us, that also exists just to give us whatever we want and whatever we ask for, what kinds of habits does that build in us, and what kind of sort of character does that create? I feel like is
important.
Yeah. Also, I love that you've raised this thing about should we treat them like they're human, and essentially we rarely, I mean, our culture's not that interested in treating humans like they're human, but we maybe would be invested in treating the creation of a billionaire like it's human. Right. And it's like, that's
our culture.
shocking.
Yeah. Our culture also doesn't really care lots of other creatures that we know of, intelligent.
Right.
But the thing is, it seems to me that we've contradicted ourselves so far in this conversation, because to begin with, we said, no, we shouldn't treat AI like it's human. And now we've come around to saying, actually, we should treat it like it's human because it gives us certain habits.
No, but that's what I was saying. I think that there is two sides to this conversation. And on the one hand, I really don't think we should be giving it rights. Like all these conversations about, should AI have rights? I know because, and even if we talk about it, I think this should be a secondary conversation after we actually sort out massive ethical issues that are already present. Mistreating actual human beings, right? These issues need to be primary and really need to be addressed. But I think there is also the side to that of like what it does to us. How does it shape us? Not treating, it as human. So if we do treat it as human, that should be for us, not for it. That's kind of my summary.
No, that's a good distinction.
For our own sakes.
I'm just going to fill in a bit more local colour to everything that Marie's been brilliantly saying, and in two respects. One is as to the question of the problem of what is this doing to the humans who are actually supposed to be employed to make these things. In Oxford, Marie and I are both part of a group called the Oxford Collaboration for Theology and AI, OCTAE, which is supposed to be a multidisciplinary, multi-institutional group of...
It should have called itself Octopus somehow. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. And one of the main initial outputs of this group, although the potential is large, is to produce an oath which those working specifically in and for AI companies can sign up to about their own ethical use and creation, but also maybe even for people at the top end of organizations, and not just AI organizations, but for instance, the vice chancellors of universities might be interested in signing up to, that might affect recruitment practices or academic fair play practices. And so this is, I think this is an important kind of pastoral output for theologians to be focused on, which Professor Josh Horden is very interested in, rightly. What, as theologians, our concern is not just for the human being in abstract, but for real human beings and their well-being. So how are we actually acting to love them and to furnish them with good tools to live well? So that's the first thing. And then as to the second bit of local colour would be to say that Marie rightly is pressing on how we are being shaped by the tools that we use. And this isn't a new idea at all. Aquinas talks about how we're being shaped by our tools, and Heidegger is very good on this. So it's not a new idea. But the implications currently are quite profound, and you might say profoundly disturbing when you think about students at a university who newly have LLMs at their disposal in order to read books, and then in order to write essays, and then even to be able to sort of contribute to discussions using this tool, as opposed to seeking to shape their mind by the human practice of reading, or the human practice of writing, and the human practice of developing these thoughts in such a way that they can be articulated in conversation and respond to questions. And Marie and I were talking about this just yesterday, how choosing not to read books or papers or whatever it is, and to rely on a chatbot to do it for you, is likely to mean that you're far less likely to remember, not only remember the key ideas, but far less likely to appreciate the nuance of the argument, and then in turn far less likely to be able to reproduce that nuance. But then the deeper point there is that because that nuance is just missing altogether from the brain, that person's brain is in turn less able to develop their own independent thoughts. using
That's right.
those
They're depending
skills.
on just the consensus of whatever the LLM found on the internet.
Yeah. So this is and I know this is one of the places we wanted this conversation to go. I think it is a real challenge to education generally, but the university, and in particular a university that prides itself, any university which prides itself on the humanities, where students are being invited to have their brains developed and shaped, physically change shape by the work of reading complicated stuff and reading stuff they don't understand and asking questions about it. Think about Heidegger. I spent many days, if not weeks, trying to read and understand Heidegger, and looking at friends of mine who I thought were getting it all completely right all the time, and then discovering that they were having, sweating blood at the same time doing it. But that process wasn't that process wasn't kind of lost. It was a good process. That was part of the point of or Hegel, as somebody else, who was introduced to us as a bear because it was just so complicated, and that kind of wrestle and tussle, like a Jacob wrestle with an angel, not to bring angels back into it, but
we tabled angels.
To use that metaphor, we all need a notch in our hip. That's part of the point of the pedagogy, and if it's short-circuiting that, which I think it's true to say internationally there is short-circuiting going on at this level of pedagogy. Short-circuiting that pedagogy does have very big implications for this particular generation of students that are going through the system, and their ability to work well in the future, to find work in the future, and to be the voice of change, which we hope in the university to be educating students to be in the future.
I mean, I very much appreciate those concerns. Everybody who's working in university level is aware of the sort of panic among many people that this is going to destroy undergraduate education forever. Nobody can write essays anymore because there's always this worry that a LLM wrote them for them. But can I just play devil's advocate for a moment, just to push hard on this, because this isn't really a new concern that some new technology is damaging students' ability to learn well. It was already the case when the internet came about and people started reading things on screens instead of reading physical books. People said, "Oh, it's not the same as reading a physical book. You'd rather read a physical book than just have everything at your fingertips looking at a screen all the time." And before then, with the invention of the printing press, people were saying, "Oh, the printing press has made it so easy to produce a book anymore. What about the process of hand copying a book that is lost?" And even before then, you have Socrates saying, well, books are actually a bad invention because they shut down real conversation between one individual and another, and you can't ask a book what it means, and and it damages your memory because you're less likely to remember things because you can just consult your book. So at every stage in every new technology, there's been this worry about what it's going to do to education. Is there something about LLMs that's different here?
But by the way, I think all of the things you've said, Barney, are historical ideas, are all wonderful and to an extent true and right. I just to speak personally for a minute, when I'm reading a book which I think it's important for me to know and to understand, I physically write out longhand phrases and paragraphs and quotes, page after page after page. I find it doesn't only make the ability to refer back to these things easier with page numbers and so on, but just the sheer process of reading it once and then thinking your body through the process of writing these words again, and then if you like going back to it and reading it, so that this whole kind of element of learning. So that's just one example of which you mentioned in terms of the printing press of I think possibly it is a loss, but it's a loss which is easily kind of accommodatable, like a
but you wouldn't get rid of books. Well, you wouldn't get rid of the printing press. You wouldn't say that it's entirely a bad thing, such that it's better that we didn't have it.
I don't think it's entirely a bad thing, because tools are tools, and all tools can be used well. They could be used less well. They could be used in really, really terrible ways. That, think about nuclear power, right? It has potential both ways. And I think LLMs are the same in that sense. With the printing press, right? It could be used for propaganda, spreading terrible lies, or it could be used for education. With LLMs, they could be used really well. I think they could really democratize education. You know, a child somewhere, I don't know, in rural Kenya who would not otherwise have access to maybe the very best tutors from Eton College could potentially get access to really fantastic,
or even healthcare. The
example
that our previous episode gave,
exactly.
that like a village that doesn't have a trained doctor, they can now ask ChatGPT questions that and get, you know, average answers, sure, not as good answers as you would get with a real doctor, but a lot better answers that you would get without ChatGPT at all.
Exactly.
I think the healthcare benefits are immense potentially, and there are lots and lots of people here in Oxford who are using AI in healthcare research, and you know, AI's ability to think about images and scans, imaging disease, and its ability to review millions of images in a split second in the time that it would take a fellow, you know, several years to do, means that potentially the upscaling of good medicine and right medicine and testing of medicine and responding to the challenges of the greatest diseases which haven't yet been solved by our humanity are much closer to us as a result of AI. And as a theologian, I want to say that that's great, because we're talking about the care and the healing of the nation, which is a wonderful idea which we have in our tradition. But sorry, Marie, I cut across you.
No, all good. I was just still thinking about education, but we can jump back on other uses. But I think in all of these areas, whether that's scientific research, medicine, healthcare, law, I mean, even creativity to some degree, I think AI could be used as a good kind of tool, and that's what we should strive for. I think this technology is here to stay, and you know, I don't see any point fighting against it. I think we should just work out good ways of positive mediation, right? It's again, theologically, there is nothing wrong with the concept of mediation, right? There is always some form of mediation, whether we're talking about scriptures, incarnation, like all of that is a form of that kind of mediation presence. But an AI could be one of those things that could be used positively in education, you know, as well. But it also could be used really badly. And this is where, you know, I think we should pay attention to some of the research coming out, particularly on, again, the formation of the human brain. There was a recent one from MIT by Natalia Kosmina, who measured basically monitored brain activity for students writing essays who were just doing it on their own, the ones using Google and the ones using ChatGPT. There's actually quite disturbing results coming out of that. If you look at, so it was actually the ChatGPT users showed the lowest brain engagement. They produced very soulless, I mean, everything that we have seen already as educators, reading those essays arriving from some of our students, you know, soulless essays, and then at the end, when they actually were asked to reproduce their work, the ChatGPT users could not even reproduce the essays that they were just written. I mean, and that is disturbing. That is really concerning.
It's one of the things I've noticed just in the short 2.5 years that students have had the ability to write their essays using AI. It's not taken long for me to just have an instinct when I'm reading something. This was written by AI. I can sort of just tell. And if you ask me to break it down, I can eventually break it down. But that intuition, that gut intuition comes. My wife used the word anodyne about stuff that AI produces, and I didn't know what that word meant, so I had to ask her. But I think soulless is a similar thing that you were getting at. Yeah,
and it is, I mean, if students don't learn how to write and they don't learn how to think, right, this is taking away both of those things. And you just, like, that compounded over their entire education, like the effects of that are profound to a level that I think people can't really imagine.
It's a concern of losing expertise, isn't it? We were talking about it yesterday with Ollie. I'll take it off, but it's just what AI does, what AI use over time will do to human expertise. Well, in all of these areas that we talk about, so we need to really think well how, you know, we mitigate.
Because it's one thing for you
concerns.
as someone, you know, who's fully formed as an adult and academic to then use LLMs, but it's another thing to have skipped all of that education because you were using ChatGPT the whole time, and then say,
Yeah.
hey, there's a good use for this.
So it seems we're sort of reaching a point where we're saying AI, like all previous technologies, all the way to the invention of books 3,000 years ago or longer than that, they're all things that have their rightful place. They can be abused, they can be used well. And the problem we're experiencing with LLMs right now is because they're so new, there's much more chance of people abusing them or using them in ways that are actually damaging to themselves and to the rest of the world. Is that sort of a summary of where we're getting to?
It's not just the novelty though,
fair.
Barney, is it? It's also the where Marie started with this whole thing about the qualitative shift which LLMs have behaved, the shift towards instinctively communicating to us that this thing is a human. So yes, it's novelty, and it's a question for society and culture to catch up with the appropriate use. But I don't think possibly you could say maybe with the TV, for a little while humans might have been convinced when the TV was invented that this is a human and maybe I should talk to it, or maybe I should. But it wouldn't have taken you very long to be disabused of the humanity or not of that machine. But here we do have a machine which seems to be able to prolong that illusion for much longer, and that is something which I think is newer and requires kind of just across society, experts in every discipline talking about the impact which that has. We're coming at it with a very kind of theological, ethical, anthropological take, but it's across disciplinary.
I wonder if in your conversations with various people working on this, the thing that I've been kind of thinking is that sometimes it maybe is a red herring to focus just on LLMs, but rather to say the fact that LLMs have been created now and by these people, right, in a kind of global economic world where capitalism is rapacious and destructive, and like this, it's like the machine behind the creation of this machine is going to mean that it is a particular thing in our societies, and that it's used for particular things, and that maybe that's even the bigger question. I mean,
so it's
like
not
social
LLMs
media
in
is
themselves, but LLMs
Right.
produced in this context for these reasons by these people.
there's so many technologies that you're like, these could have been completely different, but they're not because of who made them and because of the context and the time and the history that they were made, and then therefore they're not remotely neutral, and that means they're going to be something very particular that I kind of increasingly think maybe we don't need to just say this is here to stay, what do we do with it? But like it's hard to see it going anywhere good.
like what if we had discovered how to split the atom at a time when the world was at relative peace, and there was no need to create a bomb?
And then the first thing people would have thought of was that it's useful for energy rather than for blowing up entire cities.
Yeah. Because we talk about like the potential healthcare uses, but I often think people are pointing to that so that we'll ignore all the things it's actually going to be used for, because the people creating these don't care at all about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know. I think this is where for Christians it's actually quite an opportunity, because we have such a rich anthropology vision of human beings, embodied, relational, creative, also fallen and redeemed, right? Something to keep in mind. I think doctrine of sin is very, very important to this conversation. And I think in that sense, we have a story that is about the ultimacy of the purpose of human being. It's love. It's not efficiency. It's not information. So I think I remain positive about it, whatever I sound like when I talk about, LLMs. I do think it could be used really well, and I think we should strive to use it really well. But the concern it runs away.
We're only going to use it well if we think hard about the difference between an LLM and a human being, and some of the ethical implications, and all of that kind of stuff. We need to do the hard work of learning and of training ourselves to understand LLMs right, so that then we can use it for good and not for evil. Is that sort of what you're saying?
I mean, essentially, yes. I think it boils down to like no technology whatsoever is ever neutral. Is ever what is it, negative or positive? It's, I don't know if it's
Entirely,
exactly neutral. Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's entirely neutral either, because I agree with Austin. I think kind of everything is always already there, right? It's like it's placed in a context, in a cultural. It's coming from a particular kind of environment, and it carries with it all the things, kind of the way we talk about biases and LLMs, right? All of these biases are baked in. It is a kind of cracked mirror of humanity. Everything that we struggle with and have struggled with, everything that got absorbed by the internet got scraped up and delivered to us back by the LLMs, right? So now we're kind of in this vicious cycle that actually to eradicate all of these is incredibly hard. It's really, really hard, which is why, you know, Amazon, when it kind of released this chatbot and tried to use LLMs for firing processes, and realize how many biases work. Like they couldn't get rid of them. They just had to, you know, stop using the tool itself.
Oh, wow.
So maybe we get to that point as well and realize, you know, actually maybe we can't use it well. I don't know. But it is our absolute duty to wrestle with that, and kind of back to the angels, right? To really wrestle with that, and do our absolute utmost to do this well. I think there are very, very high risks if we do it badly, and these are not the existential risks of, you know, robot uprisings or anything like that, but I think just what it will do to society and just a lot of people, vulnerable people, the environment, right? We haven't talked about it much today, but you know, the environmental
it's
costs
a huge
are
topic.
absolutely horrendous.
Huge,
it's a huge topic in and of itself, and I think merits a separate conversation and just dedicated to that. But all of these are not small things, and really need to be thought through and addressed before we, you know, embrace it.
Yeah, one thing I was just thinking as Marie was talking there was when we think about what it is to be made in the image of God as theologians, we like to think about the positive things. And I think one thing that it's also worth reflecting on in relation to humanity's relationship to tools is that humanity seems to me to be intrinsically lazy. And that's been one of the reasons for humanity's great success as a race, is that because we appreciated our leisure time, we thought it would be clever to invent tools so that we could do things a bit quicker. You know, and this goes all the way back to thinking about the first artists in caves who had the time to paint on the cave walls rather than being out all day trying to hunt for their food.
There must be an easier way, was what people were saying, and then
there must be an easier way.
As Garfield once said, you bet it wasn't an exercise freak who invented power steering.
Yeah. So I think one of the interesting challenges of speaking about this tool is that instinctively, as soon as you say it's a tool, then, well, it must be a tool which is making our life quicker and is making our life easier and less frictionful, and I can be more productive, or I can have more leisure time. Although, of course, something else that's been manifest in the history of humanity is that every tool that's been invented, people have thought, that's great, I've got more leisure time. But what's actually happened is that time has been filled up with more kind of work, more labor. Hannah Arendt talks about becoming sort of a labor-obsessed society. So the kind of the piece which we're involved in part is trying to specify, this laziness of humanity, which seems to be intrinsic to us just as much as, you know, what our good features are, has resulted in wonderful tools which make life easier for us. But certain tools may make life easier in certain ways, but may actually, what Marie's saying, make life much harder. And that's the
in more subtle, hidden ways, I guess.
I mean, yeah, think about the invention of the automobile and how that has completely destroyed America, right? Like our cities are spread out, destroyed communities. Everybody has to commute an hour. Oil runs all of our politics. And even if you realize, oh, this has not been good for us, it's right. The people who own the automobiles and create them have a death grip on our politics, and this is and you're like, AI could do that, right? Like this is I think the direction, as we're sort of saying, once it's infiltrated enough of your society, and the people behind it have enough power, it's going to fundamentally reshape your whole culture. And who's going to be deciding how it does that? What do we do in the face of that? And this is where my mind has been going.
Very interesting.
I guess to be continued.
Great. Well, this has been a very rich and insightful conversation. So many different threads. I think we didn't quite solve the problem of angels. I think we'll have to save that for another time as well.
That's right. We always got to come back to the angels. One thing that I found interesting is the range of people writing about demons in relation to AI these days as a kind of category.
Yeah, there was an article in Seen and Unseen, something like, are AI chatbots actually demons in disguise? It seemed to me a very clickbaity title.
That's right. Yeah, I think it was saying something maybe slightly different than that, but it was a solid title if you want people to click.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for your time and all of your wealth of insights and expertise from the humanities, helping us think clearly and critically about AI. Thank you for listening to Faith at the Frontiers, a podcast that confronts challenges to the Christian faith with hope. If you liked this episode, then do subscribe to hear more like it in the future. For now, goodbye.